figure this out. Might help if I have my headset on. That. Okay, let's do this then. So, share screen, screen 2. All right, we're in week 9. Gosh, time's flying by. And we're going to talk about malware this week. Hopefully you folks got through the midterm without too much problems. I do curve the midterm, by the way. So, for example, I think it's 200 points total. If the highest score was like 186, everybody gets 14 points. All right, so that's kind of how that works out. If somebody scored a 200 on it, well, guess what? They blew the curve. There is no curve. But typically somewhere between 4 and 12 points is the average that your grade gets boosted on average. But it's been as low as 0. I've had as high as like 24 points I've given on a midterm before back. So just keep that in mind. Hopefully I will have that all adjusted here in the next couple of weeks. But let's talk about malware today, shall we? So under course content, malware. Malware is a fun topic, right? Grab the slides. It's one of those topics that it's fun to talk about. It's hard to master in a way. And what do I mean by master? Well, what I mean by that is reverse engineering. Okay. And that is one niche profession in cybersecurity that if you're good at it, man, you can really chart your path. Malware reverse engineering is part of digital forensics. I don't know a lot about forensics or I know about incident response, but not a lot about the actual digital forensics piece. But this part of digital forensics with malware reverse engineering, if you get good at it, that's where you can really, really make a lot of money in this industry, because CrowdStrike, FireEye, Microsoft, all of these companies that is where their business model is. It's in reverse engineering of malware. Okay, there's a lot of different tools that you can use for malware reverse engineering. Oops, I'm going off on a little bit of a tangent here. Sorry. Malware reverse, and I spell reverse right? Okay. It's a good little article. I've read this in the past. It has a process of using debuggers and disassemblers for the actual programs, PE viewers, network analyzers, obviously like Wireshark, etc., which are good. But basically how folks reverse engineer malware is they take the malware, right, and they put it into an environment not too dissimilar to what you do with your own VMware workstation environment. Now, I mean, that might be more robust, more systems, but it's air-gapped. It's closed off to the world. And they analyze the malware in action. It's almost like they have this system of looking at bacterium or viruses or whatever have you through, powerful microscopes. But instead of having all that scientific gear, they have technical, servers and networks and everything else. And they observe the activity of the malware and then, take it apart piece by piece to analyze it, to see what it does. Now, the problem with that is That's if you can get the program itself unencrypted, right? A lot of malware these days is encrypted and it runs encrypted. And it's harder to reverse engineer from that aspect. Anyway, I've gone off on a full tangent here. Let's get back to focusing on what we're talking about. So you don't have to know that level of detail for this chapter, okay? All I'm saying is that is a pathway that you can go down if you decide to go and explore that pathway. It's I know folks who work in that area, they have a lot of fun. They have a lot of fun. Every time some sort of new virus or malware comes out, they work their butts off for weeks on end. The folks from FireEye and CrowdStrike, I know some of them. You may know some of them too, because some of them have talked at Cal Poly in the past. Some of them are Cal Poly alumni. They worked on some pretty high profile cases in the past that they've shared information about. One of them is this SolarWinds case that is ongoing at this time. But we're going to cover what malware is, the types of malware, how to stop malware, and a little bit more just at a very high level of analyzing malware. So what is it? It stands for malicious software. Okay. Viruses, worms, logic bombs, oh my. It can be a whole plethora of nasty programs that if you get on your system, bad things happen, right? So it comes in many forms. Not all is necessarily malicious, though malicious is far often the case more than any other type of malware. Okay, so some types of malware like spyware, adware, they serve a purpose to get you to click somewhere and take you to a site so that whoever made that, they get a fraction of a penny. It can also fall into categories depending on how you're categorizing it. Like I said, viruses and worms and adware and spyware and ransomware and everything in between. So malware has been a huge problem over time. I don't have the latest one from 2020, but this has been a recurring theme. And as you can see over the last 10 years or so, it has ramped up exponentially. And then millions and millions of cases that were reported. Okay. There are millions more that were not reported. Now, is that to say that from 2010, they didn't have more? It could be comparable to 2019 just because there were fewer people on the internet and on the web? Yeah, you could say that. Absolutely. So we have issues with trying to document this just because so much of it goes unreported year over year over year. Okay, so here they've broken it down by month of new malware infections, right? And there are websites that you can go out and find. You can dig around, just do by a quick couple of Google searches, and find sites that process these types of statistics. One is Hackmageddon. Come on, click there. Hackmageddon has been around for a very long time, like over 10 years, over almost 12 years, I think. And they track breaches through a system of reports, either through the public domain or through private whistleblowers or private entities that report directly to them. And it's fun to kind of go through this and look at attacks over time. So I said I didn't have 2020 statistics. That's because I haven't really gone on here and looked at them. But you can see that they started off, we had a big downward turn when the pandemic happened, kind of turned down, and then wow, it ramped up a lot. And one of the things that happened here at the very end between October and November is we had a downward turn. Anybody want to take a gander at why that happened? What happened between October and November last year?
The elections.
Wasn't it the
Yeah.
SolarWinds?
Yeah, the well, no, not SolarWinds, the elections. Whoever said that, I didn't catch that, whether that was Luis or Jason or someone else. But no, the elections. And then, after November, it ramps up again. Now, that's kind of a trend that we saw in 2019, but was actually opposite in 2018 when we had our last, national elections, midterm elections. So interesting to see stuff, but still, by a overwhelming majority, cybercrime is the biggest, largest, I should say, category of motivation for malware, for cyber attacks, right? And the other ones, hacktivism is really low, right? If you go back and look 12, 13 years ago, and you can do that because they've been collecting data for a very long time, that's almost flipped. Cybercrime was a very small slice and hacktivism was a huge slice because you had, organizations like Anonymous and LulzSec and Organization of the Mad Cow and all kinds of other hacktivist organizations that were really active back then. Okay. Cyber espionage is on the rise, right? Year over year. I'm sorry, it's on the decline year over year from 19 to 20. Right. And that's kind of the biggest shift that we have seen. They also look at how the attacks were planned out. Was it malware? Was it account hijacking? Was it direct attacks? Was it script injection? Okay. And was it DDoS? And you can see that a lot of these attacks that we have taken on in this class, like misconfigurations, code injection, account hijacking, targeted attack, which would be like code injection. Okay, they're small compared to malware. What is really fascinating is they have 15.5% that is unclassified, unknown. Right. Hence where if they were to go in and actually do an analysis of the attack, they might find out that it's one of these other areas. Typically either a targeted attack or a malware attack. Excuse me. All right. Motivations by sector. All right. Individual attacks, public admin, defense, multiple industries. These are by attack. All right. And motivations, whether it was a vulnerability, spam, DDoS, malware, etc. And malware, again, huge factor. Vulnerabilities is the second highest one in most of these. And then they break stuff down by individual attack. And these are really great because they have at least gotten their AI together that you can go and look at these different types of attack analysis. And what's really fun is to take these types of attacks and then correlate them, especially the direct attacks, not necessarily the malware attacks, correlate them to vulnerabilities and known shellcode that you can find out there on like the Defense DB or vulnerability websites. Anyway, this is a nice, I'm going to put this in the chat. Nice little URL to go explore, have at it. It's also great for researchers to get statistics. All right, moving on. So the rest of the chapter kind of goes into the different definitions of the different types of malware. So viruses is the first one. They're the oldest type of malware. Used generally to what they call infect a system. And they're used for propagation more than anything else. Propagation basically meaning how can it spread? And just like its human counterpart, viruses try to replicate themselves and spread themselves as quickly and as far wide as possible. They can infect a lot of different things. They can infect the master boot record of a hard disk. They can infect a single file just by attaching some additional code at the end of a file. They require some sort of intervention to move from system to system. This is why we have antivirus software on the end host, and we also have other types of deep packet inspection to inspect files as they are transferred from node to node in security appliances. They can detect these types of viruses typically by signature, where they look for or a specific set of code trips a signature and causes an alarm, an alert, a quarantine, etc. Worms, on the other hand, are similar to viruses, but they are more concerned about how fast they can spread. They do the exact same functions as a virus. The difference is that the worm moves from one system to another on its own without any type of user intervention. It's more automated. And it typically requires some sort of exploit to initially infect the system, whether that exploit is an open port, a service that just allows for open communication. Think server message block, network file storage. And also, I like this last little bit here. Worms can make use of existing functionality that is misconfigured on a system. Like when you have server message block, that version 1 that's wide open and lets anybody in. Okay, droppers and botnets. Botnets have been a problem, or were a big problem about a decade or so ago, about 12, 15 years ago. But a lot of the issues with botnets have been overcome. Why? Because botnets have to have some sort of back-end infrastructure in order for them to operate, a la IRC, Internet Relay Chat. Internet Relay Chat was a mechanism that the bots could use in order to communicate back to the central command server, where the bot herder could then effectively manage all the systems that had been overtaken by the bot itself. All right. The dropper is merely a small piece of software that is the infector of the system. The bot then is installed, whether that is locally from the dropper itself or from a remote procedure call or other type of remote access call back to the command and control server, or even a third-party server, or even another infected host on the internet, that the full-blown application can be downloaded and installed. Can you give an example of one of those communities, Jason? That's fascinating, because IRC really is not used a whole lot anymore. I still have IRC accounts, but they're like 15, 16 years old. Private torrent trackers. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's a good point, Luis. Okay. Your botnet client connects to that command and control server and then awaits instructions. There was a bad botnet that happened years back that it seems like something happened to the bot herder because the bots reported back to a command and control system that was relegated to one single IP, but that command and control system never, ever told its bots what to do. It just like was stagnant. And a quick little search on top active botnets. All right. White Ops has a good white paper on this. All right. They go all the way back to like the year 2000 when we were still on dial-up. Okay. But Eve was the one I think it was. Is that the one I was thinking about? Ad fraud were able to skillfully evade detection. Resulting in a percent takedown. No, I guess I did catch them. Mirai botnet was a bad one that happened in 2016. There's still remnants of Mirai out there. And it comes and goes. So there are wide gaps in the number of botnets that are active. And Andromeda was another big one that happened in the early 2010s. But they're not as prevalent as they were in the late 2000s, early 2010s. That was kind of like the heyday of botnets. Now, why is that? The primary reason is because they have to use these common command and control systems like IRC or some other form of communication relay. And if that can be identified, you can simply shut that down through an intrusion prevention systems or other type of security appliance. And Cisco systems back in the early teens, they had a botnet, anti-botnet application that would look for the command and control communication or known IP addresses of command and control servers, or do deep packet inspection and look for specific communication that these bots were known to use in the form of TCP headers, etc., and they would shut it down. So curtailing the botnet is not that hard. It's because it's not a very complex piece of software. I always find that interesting to talk about. Ransomware, on the other hand, is today's biggest, malware problem. All right. And that's because in order to recover from ransomware, you have two choices. Choice number one, if you were smart and you backed up everything and you have backups that are offsite that cannot be corrupted, you can recover from the ransomware attack without paying the bad guys or gals. Now, the problem with that is you have to go through all the recovery procedures, right, for whatever was infected, right? And that is then just a function of, human capital and time, as well as processing power to do the restore, right? Whether that's minutes, hours, weeks, months, etc. Choice two, you pay the ransom, right? So what a lot of organizations now look at is how much is the ransomer asking for versus how much time and effort does it take my IT team to recover? Right. And this is just a simple risk management question. Who sees a problem with that? Where's there a problem in that thinking? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Come on, discussion time, guys. It's 10:30. You should be awake by now.
You don't know if it's actually completely like gone.
Like, what's completely gone? Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, if you're paying the person to essentially take away their own malware, they could potentially leave a backdoor open for in the system where they could
Okay.
come back again.
Okay, good one. Anybody else got anything else? That's a good one.
Kathy? Yeah, you're still not aware of the vulnerabilities.
You're not aware of the vulnerabilities, so you still have to do some sort of DFIR, as into figuring out how did this happen, right? The how. Is that what you're getting at, Jesus?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Anything else? Anybody else?
There's a chance they might not even decrypt your software.
Aha! There you go. That's what I was looking for, David. Yeah. There's no guarantee. You're dealing with criminals here, folks. What, you gonna make them sign a contract? Yeah, I'm gonna give you, 50 Bitcoin or whatever, and you're gonna unencrypt. No, they're gonna laugh at you. A lot of times, what happens, and the FBI even tells you, don't negotiate with these criminals, because there's no guarantee that they are going to unencrypt your systems. All right, this has happened several times. You give them $50,000, or you give them, however many Bitcoins, and they're like, "Oh, that's great, thank you. I want more." Right? So there is no guarantee. The only guarantee you have is good cyber hygiene, right? Meaning that you need to instruct your workforce not to do stupid stuff, right? Don't click on links that you don't go to. Don't open up stuff or click on links in emails. If you don't know who the email's from, be on the safe side and delete it. And prevent the infection, at the source. The second problem that you get is with, I like to call them snake oil salesmen, people who sell cyber insurance. Cyber insurance is a legitimate tool out there, but it is extremely expensive, and it's one of the worst insurances that you can buy, because a lot of times there are so many different catches to the policy that it's hard to collect on it. So that's kind of a buyer beware type of area. Another thing that you have to be aware of with ransomware in its defense is the backup itself. Because a lot of times what ransomware will do is it will look for backup files, especially databases, anything with a .bak extension, and encrypt those too. Right? So this is my thinking about why we still have tape backup, right? If we still have tape backup, if we can still back up to magnetic tape and take that tape out, we know it's good. We archive, all right? We still use Iron Mountain, and we take that tape and place it somewhere off site. We're still fine. What has happened over the last 10 years is there has been this industry push to get rid of tape, because tape is expensive, and it is, all right? Tapes wear out over time, right? It takes a lot of effort to validate that your backups are good. And that comes at a significant additional cost than doing it in the new world way, where we just take the information, we snapshot it, we clone it, we put it to a different part of the network, right? That has access to the original VM, original data store, what have you, and we can restore a lot faster than calling up Iron Mountain and saying, yeah, I need our backup tapes from 2 weeks ago. And for, these catalog numbers or however you're doing your cataloging. Right. But the tape issue is still tried and true, because ransomware, last time I checked, ransomware can't go across the physical air and embed itself on a magnetic tape. Right? It's next to impossible. It is impossible physically, from a physical standpoint. So this is why the ransomware is one of the reasons that the tape industry is still in business. Yeah, very good point, Jason. All right, rootkits. Rootkits are bad, like one of the worst things out there. And basically, the only way you can get rid of a rootkit is wipe the system. Rootkits can embed into BIOS even, and that's really bad. Rootkits are basically take over portions of your kernel, right? And rewrite DLL files and all kinds of other nasty stuff that makes it next to impossible to clean or cleanse. So once you identify that a rootkit has infected your system, well, take off whatever data that you can, or if you have your backup, right, wipe that VM or wipe that system and start over. I've been hit by a rootkit a couple times in my career, and it's like the worst feeling ever. It's like, oh, I got to redo everything. There's not really any way around this, but know what the definitions of your rootkit are. They traditionally have been used to hide the existence of malicious software. They insert at the kernel level. They replace binary files that are key to the operation of your operating system. And they can also include backdoors, right? And basically they call it a day. You're done. Once your antivirus, or once you're offline in safe mode, once you identify that a rootkit is there, game over. Hopefully your backup plan has some steps to it to recover quickly. Anti-malware. Okay, we talked, this is the next evolution of antivirus, anti-malware. There's just a, wide world of product out there that combats this. Which one's the best? Which one's the cheapest? Which one? I don't know. This comes down more to personal preference these days than anything else. If you look at the Gartner Magic Quadrant for malware, man, it looks like a shotgun blast. It's kind of funny. Actually, I haven't looked at it in the last year. Gartner Magic Quadrant anti-malware. Aha. Will it actually show us? Nope. Aha, here we go. Kind of looks like a shotgun blast. Here's the ones from like way back. They look like that. So this is 2019. It's probably the closest year I'll get. No. All right. So endpoint protection program. So endpoint security, anti-malware, antivirus. So Microsoft has made really big strides in the last few years. I was surprised to see this. CrowdStrike, again, has an incredibly robust product that's hella expensive to buy, comparatively speaking. I was surprised to see Symantec up there. Symantec has had a bad reputation for many, many, many years. Trend Micro has gone back and forth, as has Sophos. The other ones, Carbon Black, Sentinel, Kaspersky, McAfee, Cylance, Bitdefender, they're all at different places on the scale. The leaders, the further up the high and to the right that you get, the better off you are. So the completeness of vision versus the ability to execute. The higher up you go, the better off you are. So I was really kind of surprised to see here in 2019, this is again a year old, that Microsoft was the leader in anti-malware. Now, I'm happy to see that because Microsoft has had just all kinds of problems over the course of its history with malware and viruses and vulnerabilities, etc. But there are a lot of new players in this market, and there's a whole lot of endpoint systems that are not even on the chart. Go back here and change this from anti-malware to antivirus. It's always fun to see. It's going to give you the same thing because anti-malware, antivirus, kind of the same story. Yeah, endpoint protection, same story. Yeah. So that's one I hadn't looked at. CrowdStrike got out of the, well, they're still in the services department, but they've really tried to brush up in antivirus with their Falcon product, Falcon Pro. So that's something to look at in the future. When my antivirus comes up expiration wise, I'm probably going to look at this myself. So right now I use anti-malware because if I do get infected by something, and trust me, I have had a couple of problems in the last 6 months because I've been doing a lot of research. And I've been doing a lot of stuff in ExploitDB and Vulners, and I've downloaded a couple of nasties when I've gotten exploits that I've been working with. Malwarebytes has worked fantastic. Took it off, identified it, fixed it. I only have had one problem where I had an issue, and that was actually with my Steam account of all things. So yeah, I might be in the market for trying something new, but there are just so many products out on the market. Which one do you select? I don't know. They all do pretty much the same thing. The biggest issue with me is performance, and not performance of finding things as much as I want to find the bad stuff, but I don't want it to impact the performance of my system at the same time. So that's where you have a big trade-off. Anyway, I digress. Last couple of slides here, folks. There are two different types of analysis, static and dynamic analysis that you have to look at. Static looks at metadata from the file, from the artifact, if you will. Strings, data segment, imports. It basically, you look at the malware itself. This is where you use a decompiler and look at the raw code. Then there is dynamic analysis where you run the malware and you observe it. All right. This is always done in isolation. And you observe, this is where you get into doing packet captures with Wireshark. You look at the behavior of the malware. How is it behaving in system versus outside the system? You can use additional tools like in a Windows environment, immunity, stuff that's used for reverse engineering. All right. So in summary, malware may fall into a lot of different categories, right? Viruses, worms, logic bombs, droppers, rootkits, oh my. All right. There's a lot of different definitions to malware itself. Anti-malware programs are what is, kindly called endpoint security. Typically rely on some sort of either signature basis or some sort of dynamic basis where they look at behaviorisms. Malware can change even slightly. It can modify itself. There are programs out there, malware programs out there that can adapt to the environment that they're seeing. And then know those two different types of reverse engineering analyses, static versus dynamic. And with that, folks, it's going to be a little early today. Do I have any questions? If not, on Thursday, we're going to continue on with the lab that we've been working on. And we'll go over the next homework 5, which is due at the end of the week. So do I have any questions?
When is the Linux lab due?
Great question. It is due week after next, I believe. I'll double check that.
And homework 5 is due this week.
Yeah, that's on the syllabus. So
sorry.
Homework 5 is due this week. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. Hold on. My bad. Homework 5 is due this week. Now, what's next week, guys?
Spring break, right?
Yeah, spring break. So it's not week 10. So it's due at the end of week 10, which is the week after next. Okay, so you have next week off. There's no class next week, obviously. We'll get through a lot of lab 2 on Thursday, a lot of it. All right, and whatever we don't get to, we'll finish up in week 10. Okay. Any other questions?
So these it's related to the contact. So these spam messages that Amazon gives, like they give you like they just say that you have $100 Amazon rewards credit. So what category would that fit in?
That would probably be adware.
Oh.
If it's telling you that you have like some sort of credit or hey, buy this, that sounds like it's adware.
Yeah, because like literally nowadays I'm just getting like a bunch of these. So
Are you buying a bunch of stuff on Amazon?
I mean, no, not really. I mean, I do buy
Okay.
stuff, but I'm like,
yeah, who doesn't? So some of it's legit. I mean, if you go to buy something, I bought something for my wife last week. And as I was going through the checkout process, a 30% off coupon popped up. And I was like, ooh, that looks good. Yeah, I clicked on the box and it gave me 30% off of the product. So, and it was completely legit. So is that what you're talking about? Or are you talking about something else?
no, it's just on my just regular messages, like and it just comes from like a random number, like you got like $100 receipt credit from Amazon.
Oh, you're talking about phone calls?
No, text messages.
Text messages. Yeah, that's clickbait. Yeah. That's more along the lines of clickbait. Just delete that stuff. Yeah. Just don't ever click on those links in your text messages.
Yeah, never.
That could open up a backdoor into your Android operating system or your Apple iOS operating system on your phone. So don't ever do that. That's bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I just wanted to know what's the concept behind those. So,
that is basically like a text spam or clickbait, depending on how, not really clickbait, but more like a text spam. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right. Thanks a lot, guys. I'll talk to you on Thursday, and we'll get to work on Lab 2 and Homework 5. See you then.
Thank you, Professor.
See y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And one more thing, like even there's like some of the emails which I saw, which was like, and I'm so my father, we moved here, and then he has applied for like a assistance program where, and I am like housing assistance.
Mhm.
He's been getting these emails from the assistants, but he showed me. I was like, don't click on there because I didn't trust them. I was like, let's log in and check if there's updates.
Right.
Oh, there's a
Right.
house available for you, and then it's like a weird. It doesn't say the name. It just changes as a contact. But when you open the contact, like the email, I don't know. I don't like to trust it,
Mhm.
so I never let him like open a link. I only open like go to the website and log in and then check.
Right. And that's
But I
good
don't-
practice. Yeah, that's
I don't
good
know what is
practice.
legit though. That's kind of if I get the email from them, I don't know if it's
Yeah.
gonna be legit or not.
Unless you fully trust the site, and look at the URL, right? And you can even and this is one thing you got to be careful about. Highlight the URL or right click on the URL and view source in the email or on the web page, etc. Because what spammers do, and they're notorious for, is they will give what looks like a legit URL, but underneath, when you do the click, it sends you to a separate link, which is illegitimate. So be careful there too.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's weird. So that's what I was like, let me brought this to attention to, like this has been coming. So
Oh yeah, every time there's a natural disaster or any other type of human plight, people take advantage of it and try to make a buck, and it sickens me to my core. But that's why I do what I do. I try to train people and teach people to not do those things, to get caught up in those actions. And it sounds like you're doing the same thing with your father, which I applaud you for.
thank you.
Welcome.
Have a good day.
You too.
My question was much less, how do I put it? Serious, class related.
What is it, Jason?
What's your Steam?
What's my Steam? I'm not telling you my Steam.
Fine.
I don't do a lot of games online. I do single player games. I'm old school, dude. I don't play any what are they, MPOGs or massive multiplayer, MMOGs or MM whatever they're called. I don't do that stuff. I'm not
I don't know if the MMO's still alive. Like last I checked, Maple Story 2 bombed.
Yeah. But the most I do will be LAN, LAN party stuff. I'll play CS:GO. I mean, back when we actually could gather and congregate, I would sometimes go to the frag nights at Cal Poly. When I was the advisor for the Swift Club back in 2008, 2009, we started frag night.
Wow.
And we held it. This is before the business building was built, so it was in P2007, and the lecture hall that's in the CLA building. We had, I think our first time we had 8 people, 9 people tops. That was it, and it grew from there. And the last time I had went to it, I had stayed away from it for several years, and the last time I went to it when it was there, it was like good, 30, 40 people. I was like, wow. I came back to it back in 2018, 2017, and went to a frag night one night, and I was floored. They had it in multiple rooms and multiple buildings in the business complex. I was like,
oof, that's tournament size.
Yeah, exactly. I was like, holy crap, man. I created a monster, and it just got cut loose because Swift gave it up. And then it went to, I guess, the esports club, or they do it now, right? Which is great. And honestly, that's where it should be. But it's like, wow, I come back, 10 years later and just, damn. But one of these days when we are able to congregate back again in person, that's one of the things that's on my list that I got to go back and go to Frag Night. All right. I got to go, Jason. Cheers. Cheers.
Thanks for the answer. Take care.